Hello everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. My name is Beatriz Ilari. I am a professor of music education at the University of Southern California. Before I begin my actual talk, I would like to take a moment to thank Professor Amalia Casas for the invitation to present today. It's a real honor to be with you, and I'm sorry that I can't be physically with you, but I'm very happy to be sharing some ideas, and hopefully we'll have a chance to chat after the video. So the title of my talk is Musical Activities, Prosocial Behaviors, and Executive Function Skills of Kindergarten Children. Now, as you all know, the early years of life are an optimal period for child development. This is a time when a lot of changes happen with us humans. We come into the world in a very fragile state. We don't know how to walk. We're very dependent on another adult, on a mother. And in a very short amount of time, we learn so many skills, including music skills. The early years are also very high on political agendas. So we hear from economists to psychologists to musicians to teachers to policymakers about the importance of nurturing and helping children develop to their best during this time of life. And in recent years, what we have seen is a lot of interest in understanding the effects of music and music education on child development. So in this talk today, I want to talk for a few minutes about music and learning transfer. I know that this is an area that people usually stand on one end of a continuum. Either people like this area very much or they don't like it. But I want to argue that learning transfer still matters, and it's something that we, in the field of especially music education, we need to think very carefully about it. The second piece is I want to talk about two areas of research that I've been involved in. One is music and cognitive development, and more specifically executive functioning. And the other one is music and social emotional development. That's an area that I'm very passionate about. And then at the end, I want to talk about the implications. So what does this mean for practice? What does it mean for education and for future research? So the first thing I wanted to talk about is this issue of learning transfer. I know that this is a very polarizing topic, at least in music education circles, but I would like to argue that everything that we do in education, I think we all, we don't go into education because we want people to memorize test scores or they want to memorize information. We go into education because we hope that, what our work with our students is something that they will take into their lives. That's something that we do with them. It's going to be, hopefully it's meaningful, and it's something that they will carry on for the rest of our lives. So deep down our hearts, I think we're all interested in some form or shape of learning transfer, that students will take that learning with them. So I would also argue that real learning requires that we make transfer, that we connect these areas of our brain, that we connect ideas and experiences to make meaning out of our lives. So transfer of learning is really crucial for education. Now, transfer of learning is also multidimensional and not unidimensional, as some people tend to believe. So there are different aspects, different ways. It's a very, very complex concept, the concept of learning transfer. But the one that I think we've explored the most in the field of music is a near and far transfer. So near transfer is the one that's most common. It's the one that we have the most evidence for. Findings on far transfer are more elusive. But in terms of near transfer, what are we talking about? It's really transfer between areas that overlap or areas that are very close. So think about when we find that, students who are learning music, they also develop skills in, say, phonological awareness or auditory processing. Well, these are related areas, so it makes sense. They're all areas related to sound processing, to auditory skills, right? Or even when you think about students who are learning about music and then they develop different attitudes towards music, well, that could also be viewed as being part of learning transfer, right? Or near transfer. Far transfer, which is more rare to occur, is transfer that occurs between areas that are distant, like music and math, or music and cognitive abilities, music and social abilities. So we do, see that there might be connections in real life. We might have examples of where we see these, but research evidence is more elusive for far transfer. And this is also evidenced by the literature that we have out there. So looking specifically at the literature on early childhood, and by early childhood I mean years of 0 to 7, we do find some evidence of music education and cognitive ability. So this is the earlier work of Francis Rauscher. Some evidence of music and phonological awareness, in this case near transfer. Some on mathematical abilities, but there are studies that do not show transfer. Self-regulation, and also school readiness. So these are some of the areas, but there's still a lot that we don't know, and there's much more. And you see many of these studies are a little bit old, so there's still a lot that we need to explore and replicate. But I wanted to talk about two areas of study in far transfer: cognitive and social emotional development, and some of the research that we are doing here in Los Angeles. So the first area that we've been working on is executive function skills. So these are skills that have to do with, the frontal areas of our brain, and they have to do with working memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibitory control. But why would music education develop these executive function skills? So there are some explanations that have been put forward. So in here you see children playing the musical chairs game, which I think exists in many cultures around the world, which is a game that could potentially develop executive function skills. So in early childhood and elementary education, there are games and activities that we do, like singing a song asking children to sing a song and then remove a sentence and sing it in their heads or do some gestures. These are activities that potentially could help develop executive function skills in children. We also know that learning to play a musical instrument or sing involves planning, attention, and working memory, and that music is all about memory. So music makes a lot of demands on our working memory. So even if we have musical scores, they are an approximation of what the music really is. So when we think about music and executive functioning skills, and you look at research with very young children, and here what I found was usually children aged 4 to 6, the findings were mixed. So you have some studies that find positive effects from music education ranging from 5 weeks to 2.5 years. And we also find studies that also range from 5 weeks to 2.5 years that do not find effects. So of course, one of the issues with these studies is that some have measured all 3 components of executive function, some have not. Some have used a specific type of task or activity for children to do, others did not. And of course, the music programs were different. There are also issues of the communities in which these studies have been undertaken, right, that should be taken into account. So the findings are mixed in the literature, although some would argue that they tend to favor executive function, but we actually don't know. We still need a lot more research. But in what we see with slightly older children is we are seeing new evidence of effects of music education on executive function skills. So I've been involved in a very large group at the Brain and Creativity Institute of my university. And we have carried out a 5-year study with children who are learning music through an Elsa inspired program, children who are learning sports, and children in a control group. And what we found is that over time, children in the music group scored higher on executive function tests than controls. We also found, related to executive function, we also found, using parental reports, we asked them about different cognitive and social emotional skills of children. And what they found after 5 years, so children were 6 when they started, there were about 11 or 12 at the end of the study, parents in music and sports reported that their children were less hyperactive than children in the control groups. So there might be something happening over there, but it's something that, as I said, we need to explore further. Now hold those thoughts and let's think about social emotional skills. So what about social emotional skills? Could learning music transfer into, being more helpful to other people, to caring about other people? So the first thing that I think we need to consider is that music is above all a social activity. So as members of cultural groups, young children and adults, we all engage with music in many ways and with different companions. So a lot of what we do musically has to do with other people. And this is particularly true with young children. Think about this. Young children don't go around the world by themselves, right? There's usually an adult, an older child, a community member, one or more, or a grandparent. There's somebody who's taking care of children, right? So a lot of what they do musically, the acts of care and education has to do with being with at least one more person, okay? But oftentimes it's more if children are in nurseries or daycares or... So a lot of the communication that happens in musically has to do with the social environment. And this is not surprising when we look at the theoretical writings by scholars in multiple fields. So ethnomusicologist Tom Turino talked about the humanness of music, how the arts and music are a unique form of communication that have an integrative function. They integrate and unite members of social groups as well as individual selves and selves with the world. So music is this really important form of social life, and these are Turino's words. Neuroscientist Stephen Koch actually talked about the 7 C's, which are related to the social functions of music. And he said, they all relate to, context, social cognition, the social aspects of empathy or co-apathy, communication, coordination, cooperation, and social cohesion. And Ian Cross has written about how active participation in music helps make possible the alignment of our own emotional states with those of our collaborators and may give rise to a sense of an empathic community. So music as kind of, especially rhythm and synchronizing and being together in time as a sort of tie that binds. For children, remembering that when they engage with music or when they music, they learn with, from, and with other people. And so musicking in childhood is something that really helps to build communities. So the big question here was, but can music actually make children be more nicer to other people, helpful to other people? So some earlier studies provided interesting clues. So one very well-known study published in Germany, the authors found that 4-year-olds, they would help and share more with their peers after playing musical games than children who only played together. So this was a very strong evidence of the, perhaps the potential of being together in time and making music. We also know that prosocial behaviors, they emerge from very early parent-child musical activities. And this was research done in Australia. So there's some evidence coming out suggesting that this might be the case. So our questions were, what are the possible effects of formal music education on children's social skills? And to look at that, we looked at some of the existing literature. And like with executive functioning, you also have mixed findings. So we have some studies saying yes, in social skills in general, there are effects, and these are not just young children, but school-age children as well. Some studies are mixed. You have 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds, so that's why they're together. There are studies who say perhaps, but there are some caveats. So Glenn Schellenberg, in one of his studies, he found that it was children with lower scores on sympathy that saw improvements in social skills after music education, but not children who were at, baseline or even with high scores. And there are studies, especially questionnaire-based, that say no. So again, another important question. And of course, we have a lot of qualitative evidence, right? Ethnographic work, interview studies suggesting that there might be effects of formal music education. So, or they don't call them effects, but they are describing instances where people saw change as a result of being involved in music education. So what's interesting is, the studies that found more effects were the ones, again, in early childhood. So, and we did a pilot study, interested in these questions a few years ago in a very large early childhood music program here in the United States. And what we did find, this was a correlational study, that children who had spent more time in music programs were helping the researcher. In that case, it was me. We had this playful game, and they helped me more. And these were children usually who had spent more time in music programs. Of course, we can't say that music programs caused that, but we did find a link which, stimulated the study that you read, and that I'll present data now. So, here's the problem that we were interested in. Studies point to the possibility that music education may develop executive function and social emotional skills in young children, although more research is still needed. So in our study, we decided to put these two things together. Usually people study either executive function or prosocial skills in music. We decided that, well, these things are actually related as well. So can we look at them holistically and in one study? So we had 103 children attending transitional kindergarten or kindergarten in 2 schools in Los Angeles in the downtown area. Their average age was 4.5, 4 and 7 months. They were assigned to 2 groups, music and control. So what we did was we divided them at random, and there were 4 kindergarten classes in one school and 2 in the other. So we divided children, we mixed them with students from the other kindergartens, and we had one group had music the first 5 weeks, the other group had music once the study ended. The majority of our students were English language learners, so we have a very large contingent of Latin American immigrants in California. So this was a population with a lot of children from immigrant families, and 91% of these students they were in these schools that they qualified for free or reduced price lunches. And this in the United States is taken as an index of socioeconomic status. So this means that they were all from very underprivileged backgrounds. And what we did was through a partnership between our university and the school district, we offered 5 weeks of in-school music education with trained early childhood music teachers. Children had 2 weekly music classes for 5 weeks. So these are schools that did not offer music for their students. I mean, the teachers sang in classrooms, but they didn't have a designated music teachers for these schools. And we also had equal numbers, or as equal as possible, number of boys and girls in both groups. So our curriculum was very traditional and centered on early childhood, and we asked teachers could choose different songs throughout the weeks as they planned their lessons, but we wanted the structure to remain the same. So there was always a hello song, then children did some action songs with movements, with gestures. They always experimented with an instrument, or they had an instrumentalist come in and show the double bass, and then the kids could try it out. There were movement activities in response to music. We also had elements where they used props like sticks or instruments or paper folding things, or things that they did a lot of manipulation with their hands. And we went back to a relaxation exercise and ended on a goodbye song. So the children knew after 2 weeks what the sequence of the class was, what the sequence and scope of the curriculum was. Songs were traditional early childhood songs. In relaxation and movement activities, we encourage teachers to use jazz tunes, classical music, and also songs in Spanish, because we had a very large population that spoke Spanish and English, or a large population that only spoke Spanish at home and English at school. The assessments that we had, so we tested them pre and post. So before the music program started and after, we had a test of working memory. We had a test of cognitive flexibility, receptive vocabulary, and prosocial skills. So the test of working memory, you see this little girl with these cups. It's called spin the pots. So there's this lazy Susan that moves around. So we told children, we're going to put some stickers under these 8 cups, and we're going to put stickers. Please watch where you're putting them. And then what we would do is we would cover the tray, and we would move them around, and we would ask them to locate where the stickers were. Okay, and as you shifted. So this was really, you had to keep, some cups did not have stickers underneath them. So the kids had to be able to remember where they were. And once you move the cups around, and the position of the cups, could they still remember where they were and get their stickers. For cognitive flexibility, we used a dimensional card sort game, which is a standardized measure of cognitive flexibility. And in this task, first you have, we had red boats and blue boats and red bunnies and blue bunnies. And so we would tell them, okay, first we're going to play the color game. So they had to sort cards first based on color. And after a certain number of trials, we would tell them, okay, now we're not playing the color game anymore. Now we're going to play the shape game. Please sort them by shapes, okay? And so we counted, how many they got right. We also had a test of receptive vocabulary because many of our children were bilingual and some were learning English for the first time. They spoke exclusively Spanish at home. And we had the prosocial game that we had done before, which involved telling stories about these three animals. We had these blocks. And so we had these big paper houses. And I would tell them the story about this giraffe named Mimo. And this giraffe was very sad that she was on her own. She was looking for friends. So we would go around the room. We would find one of the houses. We would knock on the house. We would sing together, do some joint activities. Then what we would do is get the animal and start building a house for the animal using blocks and taking turns. And what would happen in this task was, first, at a certain point, I would drop all my blocks and say, oh no, and see how they would react. Would they help me or not? And second, the second task that we would do is I would have fewer blocks than the child. So would the child share those blocks with me, and how many, and under what circumstances? So what we did find, and you read, we saw, there was a trend towards helping in the post-test for the music group, but it was not statistically significant. So the 5 weeks of music education, did not make children help or share more, although there was definitely an increase in the scores of the music group, so trending in the right direction. We didn't see differences for working memory, and we think part of it was the task was not, although it had been employed in other studies, it was not as engaging as we thought it would be for the children, and perhaps it was too easy for the children. So they did okay. There were no big changes. Sometimes we felt that the children were just guessing. They were not as engaged as we hoped they would be. But we did find an effect of cognitive flexibility. So the card game, children in the music really had an increase after 5 weeks. And this is consistent with some of our earlier research. So, just to wrap up, of course, there are methodology issues with these studies. These are, although they were held in school, they are laboratory-based. There are studies that really look at, very small aspect of children's lives and tries to make inferences about behavior. But we thought that it was remarkable that after only 5 weeks or 10 music classes, if you will, in the context of school, we found effects of executive function. Whether these results remained, we don't know, because the pandemic hit right after we had collected some of these data. We were not able to get back to the schools and retest the children. But of course, what these designs don't capture is what we've learned from a lot of the teachers, how music learning impacted individual children and school culture, so how children enjoyed the music classes, what they learned, the songs they learned that they brought into the classroom, and how there was a sense of community building. So, I end this talk, I know it's it's a lot of information, but by arguing that, as we engage musically with children, parents, and their family, we're building community, may also be assisting with development in other non-music related areas. I think there's a lot that we can learn from transfer studies, but I think for the music educators who are listening to me, I think it's important that we be part of this conversation. A lot of this research is being done outside of music education. And I think we have a lot to contribute to study designs, to the understanding of how different programs will certainly yield, or probably will yield, very different results. And we can help think with psychologists, neuroscientists, and colleagues who are looking at these impacts, these effects of music education on children's development in different ways. Thank you very much for listening. Here's my email, and I will be with you very shortly.